Can you stop my mom from crying every night? The little girl asked the Mafia boss. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. A cold, late-night wind howled through the cracked window, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves. A small room on the top floor of a rundown apartment complex in the heart of the city, the kind of place most people avoided. Yet, it was here, in the dim light of a cheap lamp, that little Sophia found herself, watching her mother quietly cry into a pillow. Sophia was only 8 years old, but in many ways, she already understood the weight of the world around her. The echo of her mother's sobs had become a regular sound, one that kept Sophia awake at night, wondering what was wrong, why her mother couldn't stop crying. Sophia's small hands clutched the edge of the blanket as she stared at her mother's trembling figure, tears pooling in her own eyes. She had tried everything a little girl could think of to help her mother. She had offered comfort, made silly faces, and even tried singing songs she had learned at school, but nothing worked. Her mother's sadness seemed endless, and the more Sophia tried to fix it, the more helpless she felt. The light from the street lamp outside flickered, casting shadows across the room, and Sophia's mind raced. She remembered something her teacher had said about people who could help fix problems that seemed impossible to solve. Sophia had heard whispers at school about people who could make anything happen, people who were powerful. Mafia. It was a word Sophia didn't fully understand, but she had overheard older kids talking about it, and one name stuck in her head, Vincenzo. Vincenzo Romano. The man everyone said was in charge of everything. A man of great power. Someone who could fix anything, no matter how broken. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and hope as she stood up from her bed and quietly made her way to the living room. There, her mother's phone lay on the kitchen counter. It was the only way to contact anyone. Sophia stared at it for a long moment before finally making up her mind. She picked it up, her hands shaking, and dialed the number she had seen written on the flyer in her mother's purse. Her mother had never talked about it, but Sophia had seen it. Vincenzo Romano's number. She pressed the phone to her ear, and with a voice barely louder than a whisper, she spoke. Hello? Can you stop my mom from crying every night? She didn't know what to expect, but she had to ask. Her mother's tears had to stop. The line on the other end of the phone was silent for a moment. Then, a deep, commanding voice broke through the quiet. Who is this? It asked, the words slow and deliberate. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her voice steady. My name is Sophia. My mom cries every night. I need you to make her stop. The voice on the other end was silent again, and for a moment, Sophia wondered if she had done the wrong thing. Then the voice spoke once more, this time with a touch of amusement. You're a brave little girl, Sophia. I'll see what I can do. Before Sophia could respond, the line went dead. She stood there, holding the phone, unsure of what had just happened. But in her heart, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this mysterious man could help her mother. The phone call ended abruptly, leaving Sophia standing in the cold kitchen, the silence of the apartment stretching around her like a thick blanket. She had barely hung up before her heart began to race. What had just happened? Did he really mean it when he said he would help? Or had she made a huge mistake, reaching out to someone she didn't even know? Sophia's small hands trembled as she set the phone down on the counter. She didn't know what to expect next, but deep inside, she clung to the sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could make her mother stop crying. The next few days passed slowly, each one stretching into the next like an endless series of hours. Sophia couldn't stop thinking about the phone call. Every time her mother cried, Sophia would sit by her side, comforting her as best she could, but the weight of her mother's sadness seemed too much for even Sophia to bear. It was late afternoon on the third day when there was a knock at the door. Sophia had just finished helping her mother clean the dishes after a quiet dinner, the kind of evening where the air was thick with unspoken words. Her mother froze at the sound, her eyes wide with a sudden panic. Sophia's heart skipped a beat as she turned toward the door, wondering if this was the moment she had been waiting for. She looked at her mother, who was still seated at the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Who's there?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother didn't answer, her face pale as she stood up and walked toward the door. Sophia followed her, her steps light but quick. As her mother reached for the handle, there was a pause, a heavy moment of hesitation. Then, with a deep breath, she pulled open the door. A man stood on the other side, his dark suit sharp and crisp, his presence immediately commanding. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself with an air of authority that made him seem larger than life. His hair was dark, almost black, and slicked back with care, revealing a face that looked both dangerous and captivating. His eyes, cold, calculating, locked onto her mother's with a kind of intensity that made Sophia feel as though she were intruding on something she didn't quite understand. "Are you Mrs. Alvarez?" the man asked, his voice low but clear, carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Her mother nodded slowly, the tension in her shoulders evident. "I'm here to help," the man continued, his gaze flicking to Sophia, who stood behind her mother, watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. "My name is Vincenzo Romano." Sophia's heart thudded in her chest as she heard the name. Vincenzo Romano. The same man who had answered her call. The same man her mother had never wanted anything to do with, but who now stood at their door, ready to offer help. Her mother started, but the words faltered. "Please," Vincenzo said, stepping forward just slightly, enough to make her mother step back. "May I come in? I think it's time we talk." Sophia watched as her mother's face tightened, a mix of fear and disbelief swirling in her eyes. She knew her mother didn't trust strangers, especially not someone like him. But there was a strange pull to Vincenzo that made her feel oddly compelled to hear what he had to say. She glanced up at her mother, searching her face for any sign of resistance. But her mother's shoulders sagged, and with a deep sigh, she stepped aside, allowing Vincenzo to enter. As he passed her, he nodded, his eyes briefly meeting Sophia's. "You must be Sophia," he said quietly. Sophia nodded, unsure of what to make of him, but something in his voice held a certain kindness that made her feel, for the first time in days, like her mother's tears might finally stop. Vincenzo walked into the small living room, his eyes scanning the space as though taking note of every detail, every crack in the walls, every sign of wear and tear. Sophia noticed the way he moved, calm, purposeful, never rushing, as though he had all the time in the world. Her mother followed him, sitting down on the couch and folding her hands in her lap. "What do you want from us?" her mother asked, her voice strained. Vincenzo turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I don't want anything from you, Mrs. Alvarez," he said, his gaze steady. "I'm here because I owe a debt, and I intend to settle it." "A debt?" her mother echoed, confusion flashing across her face. Vincenzo nodded. "Your daughter's bravery in calling me. It's not something I take lightly." He paused, his eyes softening as he looked at Sophia, who had quietly taken a seat at the table, her hands folded together. "I believe I can help. I can offer you both protection, but you have to trust me." Sophia's mother swallowed hard, her eyes darting between Vincenzo and Sophia. She knew what he was offering, but what did it mean? What did he expect in return? "I don't want to get involved in your world," her mother said, her voice shaking. "I don't want your protection." Vincenzo didn't flinch at her words. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice calm but insistent. "It's not about what you want. It's about what you need. Your daughter called me, and now, I'm here to keep my word." There was silence in the room, a thick, uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Sophia could feel the tension in her mother's body, could see the uncertainty clouding her mother's eyes. But something in Vincenzo's words made her feel like maybe this was the help they needed. Maybe, just maybe, her mother's tears would finally stop. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. Sophia could feel the weight of her mother's silence, and Vincenzo's calm presence seemed to make everything feel more real. Her mother sat frozen on the couch, her eyes locked on Vincenzo, as if trying to figure out who he really was and what he truly wanted. Sophia could sense her mother's wariness, the unease that came with letting someone like him into their lives. But Sophia wasn't so sure. There was something about Vincenzo, something that made her feel like they had crossed a point of no return. She had asked him to help her mother, and now he was here, offering that help. And despite her mother's hesitation, Sophia couldn't deny the feeling of hope that flickered within her chest. Vincenzo broke the silence, his voice steady, almost too calm for someone who had just entered their world. "You don't need to worry," he said, his gaze softening as he addressed Sophia's mother. "I'm not here to hurt you or your daughter. I'm here because I believe you both need protection. There are people in this city who would do anything to make you disappear, and I can't let that happen." His words carried a weight that Sophia couldn't ignore. She looked up at her mother, whose eyes were still filled with uncertainty. It was clear that she didn't trust him, didn't trust anyone from the world Vincenzo came from. But Sophia wasn't so sure. There was something in his voice, something that told her he wasn't lying. "What do you mean protection?" her mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She sounded almost defeated, as if she had already resigned herself to the idea that no matter how hard she tried, nothing would ever change. Vincenzo leaned back against the wall, his eyes scanning the room before he met Sophia's mother's gaze again. "There are people who know about your situation. They know you've been struggling. They know you're vulnerable, and they won't hesitate to take advantage of that," he said. "But I can offer you a way out. A way to keep your daughter safe, and to stop the constant pain you've been carrying for so long." Sophia's mother looked at him, her face still skeptical. "And what do you want in return?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vincenzo gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Nothing," he said. "You won't owe me anything. All I'm asking for is that you trust me. Let me help you." Sophia's mother shook her head, clearly torn. "I don't trust people like you," she said quietly. "And I don't want you in our lives." Vincenzo didn't flinch. "You don't have to trust me," he said. "But trust that I can keep you and your daughter safe. You've already been through enough. Let me take care of the rest." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Sophia felt as though the entire world had stopped. She had never seen her mother look so lost, so broken. The sadness that had clung to her for so long was evident in her eyes, and Sophia knew she couldn't fix it. Not on her own, not without help. Her mother's shoulders slumped, and she let out a long, heavy sigh. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But if this goes wrong, I'll never forgive you." Vincenzo nodded, his face serious. "I understand. I'll make sure nothing goes wrong." Sophia felt a wave of relief wash over her, though she knew this was only the beginning. Vincenzo had offered them a chance, a lifeline. But what would it cost them? Would it really be worth it? And what would happen when they were finally free from the darkness that had plagued their lives for so long? Her mother glanced at her, and Sophia saw the exhaustion in her eyes. But she also saw something else, something she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. For the first time in a long time, Sophia believed that they might just be able to find a way out, that they might finally have a chance to live without the constant fear that had haunted them. Vincenzo stood up, his expression softening as he looked at Sophia and her mother. "I'll take care of everything," he said. "You don't have to worry about anything." Sophia nodded slowly, still unsure of what to expect. But deep down, she couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude toward him. Maybe this man wasn't so bad after all. Maybe, just maybe, he was the key to finally stopping her mother's tears. And maybe, just maybe, he could help them build a new life. One where they could both feel safe and free from the pain that had followed them for so long. The next few days unfolded like a series of steps in a dance, with Sophia and her mother being pulled deeper into Vincenzo's world. Sophia could feel the weight of their decision hanging over them, but at the same time, there was something undeniably reassuring about Vincenzo's presence. Every time he entered their apartment, it was like the air itself became charged with a strange calm. He had a way of making everything feel under control, as though the chaos of their lives could somehow be contained by his mere presence. But Sophia knew they couldn't stay in this bubble forever. The reality of what they had agreed to, of what Vincenzo was offering, would eventually catch up to them. The fear that had been lodged in her chest ever since she called him for help was still there, but it was now tempered by an even stronger emotion, curiosity. She had never imagined that a man like Vincenzo could be a part of their lives. He was everything her mother had warned her about, the dangerous men who ruled the city from the shadows. Yet, there was something about him that Sophia couldn't deny. He wasn't just powerful, he was methodical, and there was a sense of care in everything he did for them, even if it was in his own way. The morning after her mother had finally agreed to accept his help, Vincenzo showed up at their apartment with more than just empty promises. He had taken it upon himself to secure a new job for Sophia's mother. It wasn't much, just a small position at a high-end restaurant, but it was a start. It meant her mother wouldn't have to work herself to the bone in their current situation anymore. And Vincenzo wasn't done. He also arranged for a security system to be installed in their apartment, an expensive one, the kind that made Sophia feel like she was living in a fortress. Her mother was skeptical at first, refusing to believe that these changes could really bring peace. But with each passing day, the weight of their situation seemed to lift a little more. Sophia watched her mother, who was no longer crying herself to sleep. There were still moments of sadness, of course, but there was hope in her eyes now, a spark that had been missing for so long. But even as Sophia felt the promise of a better future, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Vincenzo's men were everywhere. They were discreet, of course, blending into the background like shadows, but Sophia knew they were there. They were the ones who installed the security system, the ones who brought in fresh groceries every few days, and the ones who made sure no harm would come to them. It felt strange to live under this kind of protection, but as much as it unsettled Sophia, she couldn't deny that it worked. Her mother was finally starting to smile again, and Sophia felt safer than she had in years. It was a strange new normal. Days turned into weeks, and the uneasy quiet that had settled over them remained. Sophia tried to focus on school and not let her mind wander too far into the life they were now living. But Vincenzo's world wasn't easy to ignore. It was everywhere. His name whispered on the streets. His influence felt even in the places where he wasn't physically present. One afternoon, after school, Sophia returned home to find Vincenzo sitting at their kitchen table, looking as if he owned the place. Her mother had been gone for the day, working her first shift at the restaurant Vincenzo had arranged for her, leaving Sophia to deal with whatever conversation was coming next. Vincenzo looked up as she entered, his eyes briefly flickering to the door behind her, as though checking for anyone else. "Sophia," he said, his voice smooth, the accent still present but not overpowering. "I wanted to make sure you were doing all right. Your mother seems happy, but I know how difficult this adjustment must be for you." Sophia stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She had never expected to be having a conversation with a man like him, let alone one that felt so normal. "I'm fine," she said, forcing herself to sound more confident than she felt. "I'm adjusting. It's just, everything is different now." Vincenzo's lips twitched, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Change is difficult, but it's often necessary," he said. "Your mother has been through a lot. I can only imagine how it's affected you, but you don't have to carry it all on your own." Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly, the words hitting her harder than she had expected. "I never asked for your help," she replied, her voice a little sharper than she intended. Vincenzo didn't flinch. "I know," he said, his gaze steady. "But sometimes people need help whether they ask for it or not. Your mother needed it. And so do you." His words hung in the air for a moment, and Sophia felt a mix of frustration and guilt twist in her chest. She didn't want to owe him anything. He had already done so much for them. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was all coming with a price. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Vincenzo's eyes softened, and for the first time since meeting him, he seemed almost kind. "Nothing. I'm here to protect you both, to make sure no one can hurt you again. And once you're safe, I'll step back. You won't have to worry about me. But for now, let me help." Sophia swallowed hard. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that this man wasn't just another dangerous player in a game she didn't understand. But her heart wasn't so easily swayed. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "I don't know if I can ever trust you." Vincenzo stood up, his posture never shifting from that quiet confidence that made him seem unshakable. "I understand. But remember, Sophia," he said, his voice lowering, "sometimes trust is earned, not given. And I will earn yours, whether you like it or not." Sophia didn't say anything in response. She simply turned away, trying to shake the unsettling feeling that had settled deep in her chest. Vincenzo's world was too big, too dangerous, and no matter how many promises he made, Sophia couldn't escape the truth. Her life would never be the same again. The following days after Vincenzo's visit were quieter, but the tension remained palpable. Sophia could feel the shift in the atmosphere, a subtle yet undeniable change. Her mother was no longer crying herself to sleep, but there was still a sense of unease that hovered around their lives. The promise of protection from Vincenzo, though it had brought a flicker of hope, also created an undercurrent of anxiety. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that they were living in someone else's world, a world where they didn't belong. But her mother seemed different. She seemed more at ease, like the weight of the world had been lifted just a little. She was more present, more engaged with Sophia, and for the first time in a long while, Sophia could see glimpses of the woman her mother used to be. However, there was always a question in the back of Sophia's mind. What did Vincenzo want from them? He had made it clear that he didn't want anything in return for his help, but Sophia couldn't stop wondering if there was something lurking beneath the surface. And she wasn't the only one who felt this way. Her mother, although grateful for the new job Vincenzo had arranged for her and the security system he had installed, couldn't shake her own feelings of suspicion. She would often glance at Sophia with a look of concern, as if silently asking, "Is this really worth it?" Despite her mother's doubts, things seemed to be settling into a strange kind of normal. Sophia's days at school were like they had always been, quiet, uneventful. She spent her afternoons in the apartment, sometimes doing homework, sometimes simply staring out the window, wondering how long this peace would last. One evening, after a long day, Sophia returned home to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a serious expression on her face. There was a folder in front of her, and she was flipping through its contents, her brows furrowed. Sophia hesitated for a moment before approaching. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. Her mother looked up, her face tight with concern. "It's this," she said, pushing the folder across the table toward Sophia. "Vincenzo sent this over." Sophia glanced at the folder, her heart skipping a beat. It was filled with papers, documents, contracts, legal jargon. Her mother sighed, pushing her hand through her hair. "I don't understand what all this is. It looks like he's making us sign something." Sophia's stomach twisted in knots. This wasn't the first time her mother had been handed something like this, but it was the first time. It felt so official. "What does it say?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother picked up a few papers and began reading aloud. "In exchange for protection, the undersigned agrees to remain in the employ of Mr. Vincenzo Romano for a period of no less than 2 years. Any breach of contract will result in immediate consequences." Her voice trailed off as she met Sophia's eyes. "What do you think? This doesn't feel right, Sophia. We've been living under his roof, but this feels like we're signing away everything." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. She had never wanted anything more than to make her mother happy again. But she couldn't ignore the growing feeling that Vincenzo wasn't just helping them out of the kindness of his heart. There was always a price to pay. "I don't know," Sophia said, her voice shaking. "But we can't just keep going like this. He's doing everything for us, Mom. Why would he suddenly ask us to sign something now?" Her mother closed the folder and placed it down with a heavy sigh. "That's what scares me. What's his real game? I don't want to be tied to someone like him. I don't want you to get caught up in it either." Sophia stood still for a moment, her mind racing. Everything about Vincenzo seemed to contradict itself. He was kind when he needed to be, but there was always an underlying sense of power, a presence that suggested he was never really helping without an ulterior motive. Yet, he had been there for them when no one else had. He had given them what they needed: security, comfort, and for Sophia's mother, a reason to smile again. But the papers her mother had shown her felt like a reminder that no one was truly safe in this world. People like Vincenzo didn't operate without a plan, and there was always a cost. Just as Sophia opened her mouth to say something, the doorbell rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. Her mother shot her a look of confusion. "Who could that be?" she muttered. The two of them walked to the door in silence, and when her mother opened it, Vincenzo stood on the other side, looking as composed as ever, with a calm, yet serious expression. "Good evening, Mrs. Alvarez." "Sophia," he greeted them. Both, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made Sophia's heart race. "I trust you've received the papers I sent over." Her mother's face tightened. "Yes, we've received them. But I don't know what to think about all this, Vincenzo. What is this really? What do you want from us?" Vincenzo stepped inside, his posture rigid but not threatening. "What I want," he said, his eyes locking with hers, "is for you both to be safe. I know it's difficult to trust me, but you have to understand, everything I've done is to protect you. The documents are a formality. They ensure that no one can touch you. that no one can take advantage of you. You'll be safe, I promise. Sophia's mother didn't say anything for a long time. She just stood there, watching him, as if trying to read his face for any sign of deceit. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaking. I don't know if I can trust you, Vincenzo. But I don't have a choice, do I? Vincenzo smiled, though it wasn't a warm smile. You always have a choice, Mrs. Alvarez. But this is the only way to guarantee your daughter's safety and your peace of mind. If you want out, it's your decision. But I will keep my word. I always do. His words settled into the room, heavy with meaning. Sophia didn't know what to think anymore. The man in front of her was offering them everything they needed, but at what cost? She had to admit, though, she was scared to walk away, because walking away could mean losing everything they had just gained. The days after Vincenzo's visit were filled with a tension that Sophia couldn't shake. Her mother had agreed to the contract, the one Vincenzo had so carefully presented, but Sophia knew deep down that something wasn't right. They were living under his protection, yes, but every new thing he did for them seemed to come with a price. Her mother was trying to convince herself that everything would be fine, but Sophia could see the cracks in her facade. Her mother had become more withdrawn, always looking over her shoulder, as if she was waiting for something bad to happen. The quiet hum of their apartment felt different now, heavier, as though it were part of Vincenzo's world, not theirs. Sophia had never wanted to be part of a world like his. She had heard the rumors about his connections, his power, the fear that followed him wherever he went. But every time she looked at him, she saw the man who had stopped her mother's tears, the man who had promised to keep them safe. She wanted to trust him, but something deep inside her still hesitated. Was he really helping them? Or was he slowly pulling them into something they couldn't escape? One afternoon, while her mother was at work, Vincenzo showed up at their apartment unannounced, as he often did. He didn't knock. He just walked in, his presence as commanding as ever. Sophia had grown accustomed to seeing him, but today something felt different. She was sitting at the kitchen table, doing her homework, when he entered the room. How are you, Sophia? Vincenzo's voice was soft, but it held that same steady authority. Sophia looked up from her textbook, forcing a smile. I'm fine. Just school stuff. Vincenzo walked toward the table, his gaze never leaving her. You're not fine, he said quietly, his voice dropping a little. I can see it in your eyes. Sophia felt her stomach tighten. I'm just confused, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. I don't understand all of this. Why are you helping us so much? What do you want from us? Vincenzo paused, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he sat down across from her. I'm helping because I promised I would, he said, his voice steady. And I never break promises. You and your mother are under my protection now, and that means I'll do whatever it takes to keep you both safe. Sophia's heart raced. But what does that mean? What are we getting into? I'm not sure I want to be part of this life. It's not ours. Vincenzo leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. You don't have a choice anymore, Sophia. Not really. The words hit Sophia like a punch to the gut. What do you mean? She asked, her voice shaking. Vincenzo's eyes darkened slightly. You're already involved. Your mother signed the contract. The people I protect have no way out, not once they've agreed to my terms. But don't worry, he said, his voice softening again. You won't be alone in this. You and your mother are part of my family now. Sophia felt a chill crawl up her spine. Family? Was that what this was? Was that what he was offering them? A place in his world, in exchange for their safety? She had always thought family was supposed to mean love, trust, and support. But what Vincenzo was offering felt more like a trap, a cage built from promises and power. She wanted to refuse, to run away and take her mother with her, but she knew it wasn't that simple. They had no money, no support system, nothing but Vincenzo and the protection he offered. I don't want to be part of your world, Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincenzo studied her for a long moment, his eyes piercing. You don't have a choice, he repeated, his voice calm but firm. But I can promise you this, no one will hurt you. No one will make your mother cry again. I'll make sure of that. Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. She had wanted so badly to believe him, to believe that they were safe, but she didn't know how much longer she could live with this fear, this uncertainty. Everything was changing, and it was happening too fast. Why me? Sophia asked quietly. Why did you help us? Vincenzo paused, his gaze softening. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. I understand what it's like to be weak, to feel like there's nowhere to turn. But I also know how it feels to have someone extend a hand, even when you think you don't deserve it. And now, I'm that hand for you and your mother. His words hung in the air, and Sophia didn't know how to respond. She wanted to believe him, but there was something about him that made her uneasy. He was offering them everything they needed, but was it truly out of kindness, or was there something else at play? I'll protect you, Vincenzo said, his voice low. But you need to understand, there are no guarantees in this world. No one is truly safe. But if you stay with me, I will do everything I can to make sure you're as safe as possible. Sophia's heart ached with confusion. She wanted to walk away, to run from everything that Vincenzo represented, but she couldn't. Her mother had signed that contract. She was already bound to him. Sophia felt trapped, caught between a promise of safety and a growing fear of what that safety would cost. Okay, she whispered, though the word tasted bitter in her mouth. But if anything happens, if anything changes, I'm not going to stay silent. Vincenzo stood up, his expression unreadable once again. I wouldn't expect you to, he said, his voice as calm and controlled as ever. But I promise you, Sophia, you're safer here than you've ever been. As he turned to leave, Sophia watched him, her heart heavy with a mix of fear and uncertainty. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed Vincenzo's visit were a strange blend of routine and unease. Sophia's mother, though still carrying the weight of the past, had begun to find a sense of normalcy in their new life. Her job at the restaurant kept her busy, and she seemed to genuinely enjoy it, even though Sophia could sense a lingering worry in her eyes whenever she returned home. For Sophia, however, things were different. She couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had become entangled in something much larger than themselves. She had hoped that Vincenzo's promises would bring peace, but the more she saw of him, the more she realized that peace wasn't exactly what he was offering. He was offering protection, yes, but at what cost? Vincenzo continued to come and go from their lives, always arriving unannounced, always keeping his presence known in subtle ways. He made sure they had everything they needed, groceries, clothing, even a small allowance for Sophia's schooling. At first, Sophia had been grateful. She had even begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were finally safe. But with each passing day, her suspicions grew. Why was he so insistent on keeping them close? Why couldn't they live a quiet, peaceful life without his constant interference? One evening, Sophia decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't keep living in the shadows of Vincenzo's world, never knowing if they were truly free or if they were just pawns in some larger game. She needed answers. She waited for her mother to leave for work before grabbing her phone and dialing the number that had haunted her mind for weeks. Vincenzo picked up after the first ring, his voice as calm and composed as always. Sophia, he said, as if he had been expecting her call. I'm glad you reached out. What can I do for you? Sophia swallowed hard, her palms sweating as she held the phone to her ear. I need to know what this all means, she said, her voice trembling. I need to know why you're helping us, why you've done all this for us. What's the catch, Vincenzo? What do you really want from us? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Sophia could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had never spoken to him like this before, and it felt like a line was being crossed, like something irreversible was about to happen. Finally, Vincenzo spoke, his tone much softer than she had anticipated. There's no catch, Sophia. What I want from you is simple. I want you to live without fear. I want you to live a life where you don't have to worry about what's lurking in the dark. I want to make sure that nothing ever threatens you or your mother again. You've already lost so much, and I'm giving you the chance to have something better. Sophia's mind raced. His words were kind, but they didn't answer her question. Why were they in his world now? Why had he brought them in so fully? And what would they owe him once he had done what he promised? But that's not what I asked, Sophia replied, her voice growing stronger. Why us? Why did you choose to help us? What do you gain from this? There was a silence on the other end of the line, and for the first time, Sophia wondered if she had pushed him too far. But then Vincenzo spoke again, his voice steady. Because I know what it's like to lose everything, Sophia. I've been where you are, where your mother was. And I promised myself I would never let anyone go through that alone. But I also know how dangerous this world can be. And when I saw your mother, when I saw how much she loved you and how much she had suffered, I couldn't just walk away. I made a decision to step in, to offer what I can. And in return, all I ask is that you trust me." Sophia clenched her fists at her sides. Trust him? How could she trust someone who operated in the shadows, whose every action seemed to come with strings attached? She wanted to believe him, to believe that they were finally safe. But the more she thought about it, the less certain she felt. "What happens when you've done everything for us? What do we owe you, Vincenzo?" she asked, her voice quiet but insistent. There was another pause. When Vincenzo spoke again, his tone was more somber, more serious. "You don't owe me anything, Sophia," he said. "But in this world, nothing is free. You'll see that eventually. But I won't ask for anything from you or your mother. What I'm offering is just a way to ensure that you both have a chance at something better. What you choose to do with that is entirely up to you." Sophia's mind spun with his words. The promise of safety, the promise of a better life. How could she ignore that? But deep down, she knew this wasn't a simple offer. There was something beneath it, something that Vincenzo wasn't saying. "And what if we want out?" Sophia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What if we want to live our own lives, without you?" Vincenzo's answer came quickly, his voice unwavering. "You can walk away whenever you choose. But I'll make it clear, there will always be someone watching. There will always be people who want to hurt you. And I won't be able to protect you anymore if you choose to leave. The choice is yours, Sophia." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sophia's heart ached with the weight of them. She didn't want to feel trapped. She didn't want to feel like she was living in a world where every step she took was under someone else's control. But at the same time, she didn't want to lose the only safety she had ever known. After a long pause, Sophia finally spoke, her voice small but determined. "I don't know what to think anymore," she said. "But I'm scared, Vincenzo. I'm scared of what happens next." There was a softness in his voice as he responded. "I understand, Sophia. I'm not asking you to make a decision today. Take your time. But remember, when you're ready, I'll be here. And you'll always have a choice." As the call ended, Sophia stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that whatever path they chose, nothing would ever be the same again. The following weeks felt like a blur for Sophia. After her conversation with Vincenzo, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had taken an irreversible turn. She could still remember his words clearly, especially the part about choice. He had said they had a choice, but Sophia couldn't help but feel that choice was only an illusion. As the days went by, their lives continued to unfold under Vincenzo's protection, but a new weight settled on Sophia's chest. She began to see the cracks in the life they were building. Her mother, although no longer crying herself to sleep, was still a shadow of the woman she used to be. Sophia could see how hard she was trying to keep it together for her, but the constant presence of Vincenzo's men, the surveillance, and the pressure of living up to the unspoken expectations that Vincenzo seemed to have for them all began to chip away at her mother's resolve. But it wasn't just her mother that Sophia was worried about. It was herself. The days at school felt more isolating than ever, as if she were living in two separate worlds. One at school, where she was just a normal girl, and the other in her apartment, where Vincenzo's presence loomed over them like a storm cloud. It was suffocating. She couldn't talk to her friends about what was really happening at home. She couldn't explain the fear that still clung to her, even though things had improved. The more Sophia thought about it, the more she realized she had never truly accepted what Vincenzo was offering. She had never truly agreed to be a part of his world. And yet, here she was, entangled in it. The phone call had been the start, and now, the walls around her were closing in. Vincenzo had told her that she had a choice, but she was starting to feel like she had none. One afternoon, when her mother was away at work, Sophia sat alone in their small living room. The silence was heavy, and the weight of her thoughts seemed to be pressing down on her. She thought back to the day they had signed the contract, how her mother had hesitated but ultimately agreed, and how Sophia had been too afraid to say anything. She thought about the men in black suits who came and went, the way they watched them like hawks, always present, always watching. The unease had never truly left her. The thought of running away crossed her mind more often now. But where would she go? They had nothing. Vincenzo had provided them with everything, from security to food to money for school. He had kept them safe, but at what cost? She glanced at the small envelope on the table in front of her, the one Vincenzo had left for her mother earlier that week. The letter inside was unread, and the words that came to mind were far from comforting. What was Vincenzo's real plan? Why had he done all this for them? The knock on the door startled her, and her heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting it, but she wasn't ready. The sound of footsteps outside followed by a pause, and then the door opening was enough to make her tense. Vincenzo stepped inside, his usual calm presence filling the space. He smiled, but it was more of a knowing smile than a warm one. "Hello, Sophia," he said softly, his voice smooth. "How are you today?" Sophia's lips pressed together, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice cool, betraying none of the anxiety that was roiling inside her. Vincenzo took a seat across from her, his eyes studying her with a curious intensity. "You don't seem fine," he said, his voice still calm, but with an edge of concern. "You've been distant lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" Sophia wanted to push back, to tell him how much she hated the way he made her feel, but the words stuck in her throat. She couldn't say it, not when he had done so much for them. And yet, she couldn't ignore the fear that was creeping up her spine. She was terrified of what might happen if she voiced her thoughts aloud. "I'm just tired," she said instead, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just trying to adjust." Vincenzo nodded slowly, though he didn't seem convinced. "Adjusting isn't easy," he said quietly. "But I promise you, Sophia, you are safe here. No one can hurt you. No one will touch you, your mother, and you will be protected as long as you stay with me." Sophia felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Those words again. Protection. It felt like a trap. "I don't know how much longer I can live like this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's like we're living in a world that isn't ours. I want to trust you, but I'm not sure if I can." Vincenzo's gaze softened, but there was something cold behind his eyes. "I understand your hesitation," he said. "But you must realize that you're already part of my world, Sophia. Whether you want to be or not. Your mother signed the contract. That's a binding agreement. You're safe, but you're also mine now. And no one gets out of this world without consequences." The air seemed to grow colder with his words, and Sophia felt her heart race. What did he mean by consequences? Was this his way of saying there was no escape? "What happens if we want out?" Sophia asked, her voice shaking. "If we don't want to be part of this anymore?" Vincenzo's smile faded, replaced by a look that sent a chill down Sophia's spine. "You can leave, Sophia. But I'll make it clear, there will be no leaving without consequences. You've made your choice the moment you called me. Now you have to live with it." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized it until now, but Vincenzo's world was never one of simple choices. It was a world of power, control, and fear. And no matter how much he offered them, no matter how much he promised, Sophia knew that they were never truly free. The weight of Vincenzo's words lingered in the room, heavy in the air, almost suffocating Sophia. The promise of protection, of safety, had felt like a gift at first, but now it seemed more like a chain, something that bound them to him in ways that made Sophia's skin crawl. She stared at him, her thoughts swirling like a storm inside her head. He had made it clear that they were part of his world now. No more simple choices. No more escape. Sophia wanted to fight against it, to push back and demand a life of freedom, but she knew, deep down, that doing so would come with consequences she couldn't even begin to imagine. Vincenzo's power was suffocating, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized how little room they had to breathe. She had to make a choice, but she wasn't sure if it was the right one. The thought of living like this for the rest of her life terrified her. But then, there was her mother. She had seen the change in her, the small but significant shifts that told her something had finally broken through. Her mother was happier, more alive than she had been in years, and Sophia knew it was because of Vincenzo's intervention. But at what cost? Was it worth it? Sophia didn't know anymore. As the days passed, she began to notice something else, something that unsettled her even more than the thought of being tied to Vincenzo. It was the way his men watched them, the way they seemed to always be there, lurking in the background. They had become like shadows, invisible but ever-present. The thought that they were never truly alone in their own home made Sophia's skin crawl. One evening, as her mother was preparing dinner in the kitchen, Sophia stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. She was lost in her thoughts when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around quickly, her heart skipping a beat, only to see her mother walking toward her, a gentle smile on her face. "What's going on, Sophia?" her mother asked, her voice soft, but concerned. "You've been distant lately. I know you're still processing all of this, but we're finally safe. You don't have to worry anymore." Sophia's heart ached at the sight of her mother's smile. She wanted so badly to believe her, to believe that everything would be okay. But deep down, she knew the truth. Nothing was ever that simple. "I'm just thinking," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure what to believe anymore. I don't know if I can keep living like this, Mom. It feels like we're trapped." Her mother frowned, setting down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables. "What do you mean, trapped?" she asked, her tone gently probing. "We have a roof over our heads, food on the table, and a future. For the first time in a long time, we're not struggling." Sophia took a deep breath, her emotions bubbling to the surface. "I know, but it doesn't feel right," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to live in fear, Mom. I don't want to be controlled, even if it's for our own protection. It's not freedom. It's not the life we deserve." Her mother's expression softened, and she walked over to Sophia, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I understand how you feel," she said quietly. "I do. But Sophia, look at everything we've been through. Look at where we were before Vincenzo helped us. I know it's not perfect, but it's better than the alternative. We have a chance now. We have a chance to live without constantly looking over our shoulders." Sophia closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. She understood what her mother was saying. She had seen the change in her mother, the way she had started to believe in the possibility of a better life. But Sophia wasn't sure if it was enough. Was this really the life they wanted? Was it worth everything they had given up? Just then, the sound of the doorbell rang through the apartment, cutting through the tension like a knife. Sophia's heart skipped a beat, and her mother's face tightened. They both knew who it was. "I'll get it," Sophia said quietly, walking toward the door. She didn't know why, but she felt the need to face whatever was coming. She needed answers, and she needed them now. When she opened the door, Vincenzo stood there, his presence commanding as always. He wasn't alone this time. 2 men in black suits flanked him, their expressions unreadable. Sophia's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Vincenzo," she said, her voice steady. "What's going on?" Vincenzo's eyes flickered to her mother, who had followed Sophia to the door. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before speaking. "I've come to check in," he said, his voice low and even. "To see how you're both settling in. I know things haven't been easy, but I want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to make sure you both stay safe." Sophia couldn't help but feel a knot form in her chest. "We're safe," she said, her voice firmer than before. "But I need to know the truth, Vincenzo. What is this really about? What do you want from us?" Vincenzo's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes that made Sophia uneasy. "I told you, Sophia. I want you safe. I want you and your mother to have a future, a real future. But I also want something in return. I need your trust. I need you to accept the protection I'm offering, no questions asked." Sophia's heart raced, and she felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. He had made it clear that there was no escape, no way out of this life once they were involved. They were already too deep. "And if we don't?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincenzo's gaze hardened, and for the first time, Sophia saw a flicker of something darker in his eyes. "Then you'll regret it," he said softly. "But I'm not here to threaten you, Sophia. I'm here to remind you that in this world, there's no such thing as safety without a price." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Sophia felt like she was suffocating, trapped in a life that wasn't hers. And as she looked at Vincenzo, she knew that their choices were already made. The days that followed Vincenzo's last visit felt like they were weighed down by an invisible burden. Sophia could no longer ignore the gnawing discomfort that had settled in her chest. She had known, deep down, that the world Vincenzo offered was not one she could live in forever. His protection was not a free gift. It was a debt she didn't fully understand yet, and with each passing day, it seemed more like a trap. The tension between Sophia and her mother had been building since that night. Her mother had been quiet, distracted, always glancing at Sophia as though she was waiting for something to break. Sophia knew her mother was scared. She had agreed to Vincenzo's terms, but the weight of that decision was beginning to show. Sophia hadn't told her mother yet about her growing unease. She didn't want to add to her mother's stress, didn't want to make her question the one thing that had brought them peace in recent weeks. But Sophia could no longer sit in silence. One evening, when her mother returned from another long shift at the restaurant Vincenzo had helped her secure, Sophia was waiting for her in the living room, the words she had rehearsed over and over finally ready to spill from her lips. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I need to talk to you about something." Her mother stopped in her tracks, her tired eyes meeting Sophia's. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting her purse down and walking over to the couch. Sophia motioned for her mother to sit beside her. "I've been thinking a lot, and I'm not sure if we're really safe, Mom. I know Vincenzo has done so much for us, but—" Her mother's eyes immediately filled with concern. "Sophia, we are safe. We have a roof over our heads, food to eat, and a future. That's all we need right now." Sophia shook her head, her mind racing as she tried to find the right words. "But what if it's not enough? What if we're just trapped, Mom? We're living under Vincenzo's protection, but at what cost? He said we have a choice, but I don't think we do. I don't think we ever did." Her mother frowned, her expression hardening as she processed Sophia's words. "You're wrong, Sophia. You're just tired, and you're letting your fear take control. Vincenzo has given us everything. He's the reason we're not on the streets. He's the reason you're still in school, and he's the reason we have a chance at a life without looking over our shoulders every day." Sophia could hear the frustration in her mother's voice, the defensive tone that Sophia knew all too well. Her mother had always protected her, but now Sophia was starting to wonder if that protection came with strings attached, strings that they didn't even know existed. "But you don't know what he's asking of us, Mom," Sophia said, her voice growing more desperate. "He said there's no way out of this world once we're in it. He promised we're safe, but how can we trust that? He said there's always a price." Her mother stared at her for a long moment, her face unreadable. Sophia couldn't tell if her mother was processing her words or if she was just trying to shut them out. Finally, her mother sighed deeply. "Sophia, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't know what else to do. He's the only reason we're not living in fear anymore. I can't just turn my back on him." "But that's the thing, Mom," Sophia said, feeling the weight of the decision that was crushing them both. "You're already turning your back on me. On us. You're trusting him, but you don't even know who he really is. You don't know the cost of this protection." Her mother's face tightened. "I don't have to know everything, Sophia. I don't have the luxury of questioning him right now. I have to focus on keeping us safe. And if you can't understand that, then maybe you don't understand what we've been through." The word stung. Sophia felt the sudden, sharp edge of betrayal, though she knew her mother didn't mean to hurt her. Her mother had always been her protector, the one who kept her safe from the world's harshness. But now, it felt like they were both trapped in a cage, and Vincenzo held the key. "I just don't want to live like this forever," Sophia whispered. "I don't want to keep looking over my shoulder, wondering when we'll be in danger again. I want to live my life, not hide from it." Her mother stood up, pacing the room with a frustrated sigh. "You don't understand, Sophia. You're too young to understand what it takes to survive in this world. If I could protect you without Vincenzo, I would. But I don't have a choice. You don't either." Sophia stood up too, feeling the anger rise in her chest. "I don't have a choice? What do you mean I don't have a choice? I'm not a child anymore, Mom. I can see what's happening here. We're just pawns in his game, and I can't keep pretending that it's okay." Her mother's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. I've done everything for you. Everything. And you think I'm just going to give it all up because you don't feel safe? You don't know what it's like to have nothing, Sophia. You don't know what it's like to have to fight for your life every day. So stop acting like this is some simple choice." Sophia's chest tightened with the force of her mother's words. She didn't know what to say anymore. She had tried to make her mother see what was happening, but her words had only pushed her further away. Sophia felt defeated, helpless. She wanted to leave, to escape, but she didn't know where to go. Vincenzo had made sure they were dependent on him, and now there was no way out. The life they had now was built on a promise, but it was a promise that was slowly beginning to suffocate them both. The tension between Sophia and her mother had reached its peak. The words exchanged in their heated argument still lingered in the air, like an unresolved chord in a song that couldn't find its ending. Her mother had retreated into silence, the anger and frustration still flickering in her eyes, while Sophia was left with a storm of emotions she couldn't make sense of. The promises Vincenzo had made to them, the safety and security he had provided, seemed to be the only things holding their fragile world together. But the more Sophia thought about it, the more she felt suffocated by the strings that were attached to every single thing Vincenzo did for them. It was a trap, and she didn't know how to escape. The days following the argument were strained. Her mother threw herself into her work, trying to forget the unease that had settled between them, while Sophia, consumed by a sense of helplessness, spent most of her time in the small apartment, lost in her own thoughts. Vincenzo continued to be a steady, if somewhat unsettling, presence in their lives. He would check in, make sure they had everything they needed, and even send his men to make sure the apartment was safe. Every time he walked into their home, he seemed to bring a new level of tension with him, as if he were constantly watching, constantly waiting for them to slip up. Sophia hated it, but she also hated the part of her that knew she was trapped. There was no way out. On a particularly quiet evening, when her mother had left for another late shift at the restaurant, Sophia sat alone in the living room, her mind swirling with everything that had happened. She couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was about to change, something she couldn't control. Just then, the doorbell rang. Sophia froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and her first instinct was to ignore it. But something inside her told her to answer. As she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't her mother. It wasn't even someone from the building. It was Vincenzo, standing in the doorway with that same calm, commanding presence that seemed to fill the room every time he stepped into it. He didn't smile, didn't speak right away. Instead, he stood there, his eyes scanning the room behind her, as though making sure everything was in its place. "Sophia," he said, his voice low and steady. "I need to talk to you." Her heart raced, her hands trembling as she stepped aside to let him in. "What is it?" she asked, trying to sound braver than she felt. Vincenzo walked into the living room, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before he spoke again. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice calm, but with an intensity that sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. "And I can see you're conflicted. You're scared, and I understand that. But you need to understand something, Sophia. You don't have to be scared anymore. Not with me." Sophia's stomach churned. "I don't want to be scared," she said, her voice breaking. "But this, all of this, it's not the life I want. I want something real, something that's ours, not something that's been forced on us." Vincenzo's expression remained unchanged, but his gaze softened slightly. "You think this is forced?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "You think I'm doing this to control you?" Sophia opened her mouth to argue, but he held up his hand, silencing her. "I'm not asking you to trust me completely, Sophia. I'm not asking you to love me. But what I'm offering is safety. What I'm offering is a future. A future where you and your mother can live without fear, without constantly worrying about what's going to happen next. You won't have to hide anymore." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't let it show. "But at what cost?" she asked, her voice small. "What do you really want from us?" Vincenzo stepped closer, his eyes intense. "What I want is simple," he said, his voice softening. "I want to protect you. I want to make sure that you're not living in fear anymore. But I also need you to understand something. You can't just walk away from this. You can't just go back to how things were before. That's not possible anymore." Sophia felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. "You're saying we're trapped," she said, her voice shaking. Vincenzo's eyes didn't falter. "No," he said, his voice unwavering. "I'm saying you're not alone anymore. You're not living in fear anymore. You've chosen this life, whether you want to admit it or not. And I will be here to make sure you're safe." Sophia felt the walls closing in around her. She had hoped, so desperately, that she could find a way out. She had hoped that she could have her freedom back, but now it seemed like that wasn't possible. She wasn't just living in a world where her choices were limited. She was living in a world where every decision was already made for her. She could leave. She could run. But where would she go? What would she have left? Vincenzo was right. She had already chosen this life the moment she had called him for help. And now, there was no turning back. "I don't want to be part of this world," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. Vincenzo didn't respond right away. He just watched her, his eyes softening, and for a moment, Sophia thought she saw something like regret in his gaze. "You don't have to be part of my world, Sophia," he said quietly. "But you are part of it now. And there's nothing I can do to change that. Sophia swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't want to accept it, but the truth was staring her in the face. She was part of this world now, and there was no escaping it. Vincenzo had promised them safety, but at what cost? And could she ever truly escape the shadows he had cast over their lives? Sophia stood there, her heart racing as Vincenzo's words hung heavily in the air, settling into the space between them. She felt trapped in a world she didn't ask for, a world where choices were made for her, and the path ahead seemed unclear. His promises of safety, protection, and a future without fear had started to feel more like a prison with each passing day. She could still remember the girl she once was, before all of this. A girl who had dreams of a simple life, of growing up without looking over her shoulder, without constantly feeling like she was being watched. But that girl seemed like someone from a distant past. A life she could never go back to. You don't have to be part of my world, Sophia. Vincenzo's voice broke through her thoughts, steady and calm. Yet there was something final in his words. But you are part of it now. There's no turning back. His eyes softened, but Sophia didn't know if it was sympathy or something else. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted answers. She wanted her life back. But the truth was, she was too far gone. The world Vincenzo had promised was a world where safety came with a price she wasn't sure she was willing to pay. I didn't ask for any of this, Sophia whispered, barely able to hold the tears back. I didn't ask for you to come into our lives and make everything about you. You promised us safety, but what if safety means losing ourselves? Vincenzo didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer to her, his presence as imposing as ever. There was a stillness in his eyes, as if he was trying to read Sophia's every thought. You don't understand yet, do you? He said softly. In this world, nothing is free. No one gets to live without consequences. The safety I offer comes with the understanding that you belong to this world now. You're tied to it. And if you want out, it's not that simple. Sophia's chest tightened as she felt the weight of his words settle deep within her. How could she have been so naive to think she could ever escape? They were already in too deep. The moment her mother had signed that contract, they had sealed their fate. Sophia wanted to fight, to scream, to tell him that she wouldn't be a part of this life, that she wouldn't let him control her. But deep down, she knew there was no way out. The more she thought about it, the more the truth began to sink in. Vincenzo's world was all-encompassing, and once you were in, there was no leaving. Not without paying a price. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Sophia couldn't look him in the eye anymore. She couldn't stand the way he seemed to know everything she was thinking, everything she was feeling. She wanted to be strong, to stand up to him and demand her freedom, but she was just a girl. She had no power in this world, no way to fight against it. Vincenzo was right about one thing. She was already part of his world, whether she liked it or not. What happens now? Sophia asked, her voice barely audible. What do you expect from us? Vincenzo's lips curved into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. Now, he said, his voice steady. Now we move forward. We continue. You'll keep living your life, but in my world, Sophia, your mother will continue working, and you'll finish school. But you'll never be alone. Not again. Sophia's heart sank as the reality of his words hit her. There would be no normal life, no life outside of this world that Vincenzo had created for them. She would never be free. The walls were closing in on her, and there was no escape. What if we don't want to live like this? Sophia asked, her voice cracking as she tried to hold back the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. What if we don't want to be part of your world anymore? Vincenzo's expression hardened, his eyes darkening with a quiet intensity. That's not an option, he said, his voice cold. You don't get to choose that anymore. You made your choice the moment you called me, the moment you accepted my protection. You're mine now, Sophia. And that's not something you can undo. The words hit Sophia like a punch to the stomach. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her world was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She had hoped, so desperately, that there was a way out, that she could find a way to take control of her life again. But now she understood. She was in too deep, and there was no escaping. Vincenzo had made sure of that. Her hands trembled as she stood there, feeling the weight of the truth crush her. She wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't. She had no place to go, no way out. Vincenzo had given them safety, yes, but at what cost? Her mother was finally free from the constant worry, from the fear of being hunted, but Sophia knew it was a fleeting peace. The price they had paid for that safety was their freedom, and once you gave that up, there was no getting it back. Vincenzo turned to leave, his presence still looming in the doorway. "Think about it, Sophia," he said, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. "You don't have to like it, but this is your reality. You'll get used to it." As the door clicked shut behind him, Sophia stood frozen, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She was trapped, caught in a world she never asked for, and there was no way out. Weeks passed, and Sophia felt herself growing numb to the world around her. Vincenzo's words had become a constant presence in her mind, a reminder that no matter what she wanted, no matter how hard she fought to regain control, she was now bound to his world. The promise of safety he had given them still lingered, but with it came the realization that freedom was a luxury they no longer had. She had tried to convince herself that everything was fine, that her mother's newfound peace was enough to justify their situation, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something dark loomed over them. She watched her mother, who seemed more at ease now, smiling more, laughing even. But Sophia knew it was a facade. Her mother had always been a fighter, always the one to keep them going. But Sophia could see the cracks in the armor, the quiet resignation in her eyes. She knew that her mother wasn't truly free. They were living in a gilded cage, one made of promises, protection, and a world that was not their own. One evening, as Sophia sat by the window staring out at the city skyline, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her mother's voice calling from the kitchen. "Sophia, dinner's ready." Sophia sighed, standing up slowly and walking to the kitchen, her steps heavy. She had become accustomed to these little moments of normalcy, but they never seemed to last. Dinner had become a ritual, nothing spectacular, just a simple meal, but it was the only time they could pretend everything was fine. Her mother had always insisted on eating together, making it a small act of rebellion against the world that had always tried to tear them apart. As they sat down at the table, Sophia could see her mother's eyes shining, a small smile on her face. But this time, it wasn't the same. The smile seemed forced, like she was trying too hard to make everything appear normal. Sophia could feel the weight of the silence between them, the unspoken words hanging in the air. "Mom," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you ever wonder if this is all worth it? I mean, look at what we've given up, what we've lost." Her mother looked at her, her face softening. "Sophia, we're safe now. That's all that matters. I've been through too much to let you go back to that life. You know this is the best we can do." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to believe her mother, wanted to believe that this life they were living now was enough, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. "But is it really living, Mom?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not free. We're not ourselves anymore. We're just surviving." Her mother's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Surviving is enough," she said quietly, but there was a hesitation in her voice that Sophia hadn't heard before. It was as if her mother was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince Sophia. "It's not enough," Sophia whispered, looking away from her mother. "I don't want to just survive. I want to live. I want to make choices for myself, not have them made for me." Her mother didn't respond. Instead, she reached for Sophia's hand, squeezing it gently. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. Sophia could see the pain in her mother's eyes, but there was something else there, something she hadn't noticed before. A glimmer of fear. Sophia's heart ached as she realized that her mother was just as trapped as she was. They had both been pulled into Vincenzo's world, and now there was no way out. "I know you're scared, Sophia," her mother said softly. "But you have to understand. This is the only way we can be safe. I can't lose you again. I can't lose everything." Sophia squeezed her mother's hand back, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She didn't want to admit it, but she understood. Her mother had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. And now, Sophia realized, her mother was holding on to Vincenzo's world because it was the only thing that gave her a sense of control. But it wasn't real. None of it was real. Sophia had come to a painful realization. They were living in a world of illusion, a world where the promises of safety and protection were just another way to control them. She wanted to fight, wanted to run, but where could they go? What could they do? Vincenzo had built a life for them, but it was a life on his terms. And the more Sophia thought about it, the more she realized that she and her mother were now pawns in a game they had never agreed to play. The doorbell rang, interrupting their quiet moment, and both Sophia and her mother looked toward the door. They both knew who it was. Vincenzo. Her mother sighed, standing up to answer it, but Sophia remained seated, staring at her hands. She had become so accustomed to this life that she didn't even flinch when Vincenzo entered the room. He smiled, his presence filling the space like always, but this time, Sophia couldn't help but feel the weight of everything he represented. "Good evening, Mrs. Alvarez," Vincenzo said, his voice smooth. He turned to Sophia, his eyes soft but calculating. "Sophia, what now?" Sophia asked, her voice more tired than angry. Vincenzo's smile remained, but there was something darker beneath it. "We move forward," he said simply. "You'll see. Things will be fine." But Sophia couldn't bring herself to believe him. She had heard those words before, but they never felt true. Everything about their life now felt like a lie they were forced to live in. Vincenzo had promised safety, but he had also promised control. And the more Sophia thought about it, the more she realized that they were never going to be free. She wasn't sure if she would ever be able to break free from the chains that Vincenzo had wrapped around their lives. But she knew one thing. No matter what happened, she couldn't let herself forget who she was. She couldn't let Vincenzo's world swallow her whole. Not yet, anyway. I am thrilled to introduce you to a gripping journey in the world of dark romance, where nothing is what it seems. In this tale, a young woman finds herself caught in the web of a powerful man who offers her safety, yet traps her in a world she never wanted. As she navigates the complex and dangerous dynamics of her new life, the tension between love, control, and freedom grows. This dark romance is a powerful reminder of the cost of protection, the price of safety, and the choices that define who we become. With each step she takes in this twisted world, the lines between love and manipulation blur, and the reality of the dark romance she's been swept into becomes impossible to ignore. Despite the allure of safety, the dark truths begin to surface, and the young woman must confront what it means to live in a world where freedom comes at a price. Will she be able to escape the grip of this dark romance, or will she become its unwilling participant forever? Follow along as the story unfolds, revealing the true cost of a love built on power, promises, and secrets. This dark romance is not just about passion, but about survival in a world where choices are made for you. The stakes are high, and the consequences of each decision weigh heavily, drawing you deeper into the chilling grip of dark romance.